Despite being nerfed and changed dozens of times before her release, it's official. Yanagi is ZenlessZoneZero's highest damage DPS. In a game with Jane Doe and Juyuan at the top, it is incredibly impressive for any character to go above and beyond them, but Yanagi actually has. This needs context though. Yanagi is one of the hardest DPS to play, and it's not for the reason you might think. But today, I'll be breaking down everything you need to know to make her one of the strongest agents on your team. However, before I continue, the footage from today's video will be from the creator beta server, so things are subject to change. Hopefully not anymore though. Let's get into it. Yanagi may remind you of Jane because they spend a lot of time on field and deal significant damage. However, unlike Jane, Yanagi is much more complicated to play. Although both are capable of dealing amazing anomaly damage, Yanagi has a few more steps to achieve this goal. Instead of simply basic attacking and filling up an anomaly bar, she is instead forced to set up an anomaly before she can truly shine. This is where the two begin to differ and where Yanagi may seem more intimidating at times to play. Yanagi looks to buff Disorder by an insane amount while also having two stances. These stances allow her to buff her own personal damage via electric damage increase and pen ratio buff, while she also gains anti-interrupt. But that isn't the best part of her kit. When Yanagi hits an enemy with a downward strike from her EX special attack, she triggers a special mini disorder effect called Polarity Disorder. This deals 15% of the original disorder effect plus an additional 3200% of Yanagi's anomaly proficiency. The special disorder from this effect also does not remove a target's anomaly, which is very helpful for disorder application, but the most important thing to remember here is that this all deals an insane amount of damage. To deal this absurd damage, however, we will first break down how it all works. Let's start with her core passive. When Yanagi activates her EX special attack, the damage multiplier of disorder is increased by 250% when any squad member applies disorder to an enemy lasting 15 seconds. Casting her EX special and landing a hit against an enemy also increases Yanagi's personal electric damage against them by 20% for 15 seconds. To nobody's surprise, this is a brand new fancy effect that no other agent in ZenlessZoneZero has. With this, Yanagi becomes the best disorder agent in the anomaly category, and it's not even close. The way this ability works and synergizes with Yanagi's kit also makes it extremely helpful since Yanagi casts her EX special attack constantly while also dealing constant disorders. Yanagi's additional ability also boosts her anomaly buildup, which is amazing, and this can be activated whenever she is paired with someone who has the same element or when she's on the same team as an anomaly agent. This leaves her best paired with anomaly and electric agents like Bernice, Rina, and even Changyi, but we'll dive deeper into the team synergies later. Overall, this is definitely something worth activating and keeping for every Yanagi team, so remember to pair wisely. Yanagi's basic attack and special attacks are complicated, and that isn't even addressing her stance mechanics. To simplify, let me explain each topic briefly. Yanagi has two stances that she can utilize: Jogen, which increases her electric damage, and Kagen, which increases her pen ratio. While both stances provide meaningful buffs alongside sharing an increase to her anti-interrupt levels, the most confusing part about this is identifying which stance you're in. To identify which stance she is in, you can use the following techniques. First, at the top left of your screen, Yanagi will have an indicator that will flash a set of arrows in one specific direction with the associated color and stance that she is in. Second, the attack combo she performs with her 3rd to 5th basic attack string is also a sign of which stance she's in. If she performs a multi-hit slice that dashes through the enemy, she is in Jogen. If she jumps in the air and performs a jumping attack, she is in Kagen. And finally, as a few of you lovely viewers have noticed, the ribbon behind her changes colors whenever she swaps stances. But admittedly, the ribbon is actually pretty small and can be overlooked easily amongst all the flashing colors and moving objects. She can swap between these two stances via EX special attack and when performing an assist follow-up attack, but when she does, she retains the bonus from the previous stance even when switched for 8 seconds. To make things easy, here's what you need to know about the stances. Jogen is the blue stance buff that deals more damage and plays more smoothly, and by comparison, Kagen feels a bit more defensive and clunky at the expense of having more iframes. Despite this, you will need to alternate between Jogen and Kagen to maintain both buffs so that you can maximize Yanagi's damage, but this also means that staying in Jogen as much as possible should be your goal. That was a lot to take in just for the stances portion of her kit, but now let's talk about her attacks and skill set, starting with her basic attack. This is a 5-part attack sequence that has 2 sets of combos depending on which stance you're in. Within the attack combos, the highest damage basic attacks and the ones you will want to focus on are the 3rd, 4th, and 5th hits. The importance of these 3 attacks is highlighted throughout the rest of her kit, with other abilities providing a skip over the first 2 attacks of her basic attack and allowing Yanagi to start at the 3rd part of this attack string so that she can immediately begin dealing higher damage. For Yanagi's overall DPS, this is an amazing feature of her kit and is something advanced Yanagi players will want to take note of, but in order to really see where her damage comes from, let's talk about her EX special. Yanagi's special attack is very interesting. interesting, since the non-energy version actually has a use. This is unlike almost any other agent in the game, with most avoiding an energy-less special attack at all costs. To break down what this skill does though, let's start with the energy-less variation. This is a forward slash that swaps stances, deals electric damage, and increases anti-interrupt. Additionally, when casting this after the 3rd, 4th, or 5th hit of a basic attack, she activates Swift Routen. Swift Routen increases the speed of her special attack slash and her stance change. This is very important to make Yanagi's playstyle feel smooth. When she has this active, she also blocks enemy attacks and has access to the attack combo skip that we mentioned earlier, which lets her start from the 3rd hit as opposed to her 1st. Through this, it is clear that even this special attack has value for Yanagi, but let's not skip too far ahead here. Her energy using special attack is slightly different, with a quick forward thrust followed by a downward attack that also gains anti-interrupt and deals electric damage. Unlike the normal special attack, however, Yanagi does not gain Swift Routen. Instead, she gains Shinra Bansho and has access to Polarity Disorder. When in the Shinra Bansho state, following up with a subsequent basic attack from the 5th hit of a basic or other skills will cause Yanagi to begin her attacks from the 3rd hit of the basic attack combo. In regard to Polarity Disorder, this once again is simply a damage effect that has great scaling and is an amazing burst, but it does require you to hit the downward attack from her EX special on an anomaly affected enemy in order to activate. Now, Yanagi's special attacks are a huge source of her damage, but this is also part of the reason why she can be much more daunting or difficult to play at times. Long story short, you need to use both of Yanagi's special attack versions to maximize her DPS. Yanagi's dodge abilities are similar to other agents, but it's worth noting that performing a dodge counter allows Yanagi to perform her basic attack skip. Again, this is valuable since it allows you to avoid the low damage 1st and 2nd basic attacks, and you will inevitably need to perform dodge counters anyways to evade enemy skills. Yanagi's dodge and most of the upcoming skills I'm about to address share similarities, primarily because they all provide Yanagi the basic attack skip, and Yanagi's assists are no different. But there's a catch. When performing this follow-up attack, Yanagi will change her stance from whichever she is currently in. This sounds pretty deceptive since it reads like she can just use this whenever she wants to swap to whatever stance she wants on command, but really this can force her into some uncomfortable situations where she's forced to avoid performing a follow-up attack if she doesn't want to swap her stance. Thankfully, there are ways to work around this, but it does mean that you need to adjust to them. Yanagi's chain attack also has a swap stance and basic attack skip as a feature, but her chain is pretty quick and deals decent damage, so there's not much to talk about. Given the anomaly buildup that it applies, however, it should definitely be used whenever possible and is one of the better attacks to end a chain combo on, assuming you want to end with a quick attack. Finally, let's talk about her ultimate. This is a crazy damage dealing and anomaly building ability, and it too has the basic attack skip. If the damage and anomaly buildup from using the skill wasn't enough, her ultimate has the craziest final feature to make it insane. When her ultimate hits an enemy affected by anomaly, it also activates Polarity Disorder when the lightning strike lands. This of course is amazing simply because she gains more damage, but there's another feature to consider. Depending on how you choose to interpret it, her not swapping stances with the skill can actually be very nice, since it's one less skill to keep track of in terms of stance swapping, but at the end of the day, the skill is of course very strong and always worth using, regardless of what it would cost to cast. But to conclude things about the ultimate, it's very strong and always worth using, so make sure to use it after you've timed all your buffs together. Before we continue, I talked about the nerfs given to Yanagi prior to her release in my first impressions video, so I'll recap what was introduced and what my thoughts are now. Yanagi's disorder multiplier was reduced to 250 from 350, and her polarity disorder was reduced to 15% of the original disorder effect plus 3200% instead of 18 and 4000. This is a pretty decent nerf for Yanagi's damage, but even with all this, she still outperforms most of the other agents by a decent amount. The total decrease in damage between these nerfs is around 10% depending on scenario and team setup, but since she was already so far ahead of the other agents, at worst she is slightly worse or equal to Jane. Let me repeat that. At worst, she is slightly worse or equal to Jane. This is dependent on performance and skill issue, but it is very crazy to see a character deal this much damage after we've seen her nerfs. In terms of skill priority for upgrades, here is now what you can expect. Upgrading her core, then her EX special, then ultimate, basic, assist, and ending with dodge is your ideal order. The exact sequencing of assist and dodge will likely not matter as much, but as with all damage dealers in ZenlessZoneZero, the more investment you give to an agent, the more damage they'll deal. This is slightly different for anomaly agents since of course they rely mostly on anomalies to deal their high damage performances, but ultimately the increases to days and increase to damage that they deal with the actual abilities may end up aiding in clears when you least expect it. This next section took me the longest to compile, so bear with me. But finally, let's talk about Yanagi's combos. Once you understand understand how Yanagi's stance is and where her damage comes from, this section is not that confusing, but there's definitely a learning curve. The first thing we need to determine is the stance that the following combos will begin with. For the sake of Yanagi's damage, and in order to spend as little time in Kagen as possible, we will start in Jogen, enter into Kagen, then swap back to Jogen again. As a reminder, this ordering will matter, and timing stance buffs accordingly is extremely important to maximize her DPS, but let's take a look at exactly where and when to use her combos. As a short note before we begin, players who are tempted to treat Yanagi's basic attacks as the same as Jane are in for an eye-opening experience when they realize that they don't perform very similar at all. That being said, the first combo that I discovered is helpful when fighting multiple enemies. Unfortunately though, Yanagi is not nearly as self-sufficient or smooth when it comes to eliminating enemies without setup, so here's what I found to work the best. The time it takes for Yanagi to fill an anomaly bar can be lengthy, so swapping to another stunner or agent like Bernice to amplify Yanagi's basic attacks against multiple enemies is very helpful. In nearly every test run that I performed with the Yanagi, opening with her on field against several waves of enemies felt clunky and undesirable, especially if I didn't use energy. This means that grouping enemies together with the stunner's basic attacks or using a character like Nicole to vacuum opponents into a clump would definitely make things easier. However, once enemies were stacked together, Yanagi could easily use one of two methods to clear: eliminate all enemies via stun into chain attack, then follow with basic 3-4-5, or even just use basic 1-2-3-4-5 after they're all on top of each other. Where things get more complicated, however, is when Yanagi attempts to fight bosses or elites. In this case, we once again have the boss killer combo. This combo is relatively straightforward and begins with an EX special cast when starting in Jogen. Following this is a cast of Yanagi's basic 3, 4, and 5, which are in Kagen, and then we cast a no energy consuming special attack to quickly swap back to Jogen, followed by basic 3, 4, 5, repeated twice until we begin the cycle once again. This maximizes the total special attack casts, Yanagi's polarity disorders, and is what you will use if you choose to main DPS / spend more time on field with her, but I totally get it. This sounds like a lot. Here's a quick breakdown of what the combo is designed to do. When starting in Jogen, the first cast of Yanagi's EX special is to avoid overcapping on energy, gain Kagen's pen ratio buff, and also to gain Shinra Bansho. This allows her to use the basic attack string from the third basic and avoids low damage uptime. The next third, fourth, and fifth basic attacks following this are designed to deal damage, but performing the special attack after is necessary to swap back into Jogen. This provides the other half of her stance's buffs and Swift Ruten, which then allows her to perform 2 fast basic attack combos back to back and generate decent damage and anomaly buildup. As a disclaimer, this combo does also change depending on whether she casts assist follow-up attacks or if she performs dodge counters in between attacks, but there is something that's even more important to understand before playing Yanagi. Although one of her biggest sources of damage comes from polarity disorders, the only way to begin activating or gaining access to them is by hitting enemies affected by anomaly first. With this, applying anomaly as soon as possible, either via support, stunner, sub DPS, or even by herself, is super critical. Otherwise, some parts of Yanagi's combos will simply deal electric anomaly instead and not deal the disorder. Let's talk about builds for Yanagi now. There has been some confusion that I've been seeing surrounding Yanagi's potential set options, and I'm here to clear things up. Yes, there are 2 ideal sets for her as an anomaly damage dealer, and yes, one of them is Chaos Jazz. This might sound confusing since part of Chaos Jazz's 4-piece set effect favors being off-field with its wearer, but Yanagi does actually have to be off-field on occasion when she's swapping through characters. However, even without this being the case, Yanagi gains a decent amount of stat simply from using Chaos Jazz. Between the 30 anomaly proficiency and the increased electric damage she gains, there aren't many other sets in the game that can even contend with this. Her alternatives, in case you were wondering, are really not that much better outside of Thunder Metal. Take a set like Freedom Blues for instance, where Yanagi will gain little value from the set as a whole, since her goal isn't to buff another character. Puffer Electro sounds like a set that could be worth investigating, but based on calculations done with this setup, it also suffers much like how it did on characters like Ellen from early ZenlessZoneZero theory crafting. Praying that you get a crit via the Woodpecker set is also a viable option, but as I mentioned earlier, I wouldn't probably recommend this given how RNG it could be, and with nearly every other set, there are 1 or more flaws that contribute towards Thunder Metal or Chaos Jazz simply being better. But rather than fixate on these other sets, let's actually talk about these 2 sets. Thunder Metal and Chaos Jazz both perform very similarly to each other, but even these 2 sets do not synergize perfectly alongside Yanagi. Thunder Metal is amazing when using a mono electric team alongside Yanagi, but avoiding any cases of applying disorder in a Bernice Yanagi team may be much more difficult and therefore may actually result in the set losing some attack increase uptime. Chaos Jazz, on the other hand, does also suffer slightly. Yanagi is a greedy main field DPS, so therefore trying to maintain the 4-piece set effect passive can actually be kind of difficult when she's swapping off when she wants to be on field. However, swapping to other agents to reapply buffs is pretty common, and Chaos Jazz does offer a decent amount of value via stats and also to Yanagi's EX special attacks, so ultimately it's one of the better options for her regardless of its flaws. Enough talk about 4-piece side effects though, let's now talk about 2-pieces. Thankfully this section is very quick. Nearly every 2-piece effect in the game is worth roughly 2 or so rolls of value, and this means that Hormone Punk, Freedom Blues, Puffer Electro, Chaos Jazz, Thunder Metal, pretty much any set will work, and the best rolled set will be the one that you should run. My personal choice will be 4-piece Chaos Jazz and 2-piece Freedom Blues on my Bernice Yanagi team, and otherwise 4-piece Thunder Metal and 2-piece Chaos Jazz / Freedom Blues on my Electric only team. For main stats and substats, I recommend the following. 4th slot should have Anomaly Proficiency with its alternatives performing very poorly, and I really don't recommend it. 5th slot should have Electric Damage, Attack Percent, or Pen Ratio depending on whether she has Rina on the team. And finally, her 6th slot should be reserved for Anomaly Mastery with its alternative being Attack Percent, unless you're using Yanagi with a Mono Electric team, in which case just use Attack Percent with the Mono Electric team. Before we talk substats though, here are a few things to know about her main stat choices. The argument of Electric Damage versus Pen Ratio is really based on whether Rina is on the team or not, but for most cases Electric Damage is simply much better. Attack Percent as always is decent for not needing to reform out a new disk drive every time a new character is released, and let's be honest, with how many Anomaly agents are being released, leaving this as Attack Percent will likely mean that someone else in the future can use this disk drive. For 6th slot, I would personally run Anomaly Mastery on most, if not all of my Anomaly agents, since applying anomalies is ultimately the goal of any Anomaly based character, but as always there are some scenarios, including the Mono Electric one that I described, where including Attack Percent is definitely going to perform better, if not equal to Anomaly Mastery. My recommendations for main stats is therefore Anomaly Proficiency 4th slot, Electric Damage 5th slot, and Anomaly Mastery 6th slot. For substats, the only 2 stats to focus on for Yanagi are Anomaly Proficiency and Attack Percent, with Flat Attack and Pen being equal options as 3rd or 4th priority, but this leaves us with the following potential stat lines. Yanagi with lower investment should still have at least 2.5k attack and 275 anomaly with 192 anomaly mastery. This is just a max anomaly mastery disc, by the way. An average Yanagi should at least have 3000 attack and 300 anomaly with no change in anomaly mastery, because again it's just one fully upgraded anomaly mastery disc. And the final endgame build should be 3.2k attack and 375 anomaly with 192 mastery. No surprises there. This next part is both a blessing and a curse. Let's finally talk about W engine choices. Yanagi has several W engine choices, but none compared to her signature. Time Devouring Stratagem is a fantastic W engine for Yanagi and any electric anomaly agent. The anomaly buildup increase, the anomaly proficiency, and the disorder damage are all insane while having an easy to activate condition. And additionally, since the passive effect of this W engine focuses on EX special attacks specifically, it can be used well by almost every anomaly agent in the game. Let's now talk about her alternatives. For this, I have good and bad news. The good news is that most of her alternatives are close in performance to one another, but the bad news is that they all perform way worse than the signature. Upon further research and testing, the original perceived 20% difference in damage can actually go as high as even 27% in some cases and with some teams, and this is of course worth mentioning for players who are skipping her W engine or were considering whether or not it's worth to pull. Fusion Compiler, Weeping Gemini, and Electro Lip Gloss are all roughly similar in performance, but the worst performer of all these alternatives is Rainforest Gourmet, even if it's the easiest to activate. Now with this comes an important question. Is her signature actually worth pulling? It is very worth to pull her own signature, given how much value and how much better this W engine is compared to the others. But I'd actually like to talk about a different but related conversation regarding her W engine, and that's for those of you curious about whether getting a second copy of an agent or a first copy of her signature W engine is better. The answer for this is that Yanagi's signature wins out, and you should definitely get it over a second copy of Yanagi. However, in general, the argument towards pulling for a character over their W engine mostly revolves around future-proofing, power creeping, and winning or losing a 50-50 or 75-25. This is a little bit different for Yanagi, however, and as we've seen from character release to character release, ZenlessZoneZero appears to be releasing a new mechanic or feature to every agent that will make the next even more broken. So with this, I believe there's even greater value right now in pulling for the W engine that can be used on future characters, as opposed to just hyperfixating on one specific agent and getting several Mindscapes. For my recommendation W engine wise, however, it's genuinely tough to pull one specifically. Each of these W engines not only performs similarly to each other, they also have their own intended scenario where they shine. Weeping Gemini may have increased value since Yanagi stacks multiple anomalies on top of each other, but as usual, this will lose value the moment that she attempts to stun or kill an enemy. Electro Lip Gloss may perform decently as well as a W engine choice, but it also does have the requirement of being a Battle Pass W engine and needing another anomaly before activating. Now, despite each of these having more specific use cases, Rainforest Gourmet has the easiest condition to activate, but suffers greatly in performance compared to its alternatives. With this, I would recommend taking either Electro Lip Gloss, Weeping Gemini, or honestly even her signature because of how massive the difference in performance is. But at the end of the day, it's tough for me to honestly recommend Gacha-ing as one of the best choices for a W engine, therefore use what you have. Yanagi's Mindscapes are pretty cool, but honestly they serve as stat increases at the end of the day. Yanagi's first Mindscape is pretty interesting with a stacking clarity mechanic that gives her 80 additional anomaly proficiency and invulnerability frames. This is a decent damage increase, but it's actually still worse than what you would gain from obtaining her signature W engine. Her second Mindscape is also pretty unique, to be honest, and has interesting implications for her build and how it would affect it, but it gives Yanagi the ability to consume additional energy to launch another thrust. This is pretty different from the average Mindscape that is given to agents in ZenlessZoneZero, since it's a fundamental change to how you play the character, but ultimately it's more damage, and I think that's pretty neat. The fourth Mindscape increases team-wide damage by a decent amount, but this is not nearly to the same level of impact that her first or second Mindscape have. Therefore, I would definitely recommend against going for her fourth Mindscape and stopping at the first or second. Her sixth Mindscape is pretty insane though, since it's the final upgrade while also increasing her damage by a crazy amount, but that's all it really is. More damage packaged in a different way. It is pretty appealing though. This brings us to the team section. After even more testing and experimenting, I have some adjustments and thoughts on the team I previously recommended from my first impressions video. The two teams I formally and still do recommend are Bernice, Yanagi, Caesar, and Yanagi, Chingy, Rina, but there are some alterations that can be made to make the team seem more accessible or comfortable. First, Seth with his fourth Mindscape can actually take part as a flexible option in the Yanagi, Chingy, Rina team. Given his affinity for stunning and the anomaly proficiency buff that he provides, this team may have initially felt a bit clunkier than usual, but it ended up smoothing out and performing decently so long as I use Seth as a primary defensive assist bot that could stun. This does come with its own set of concerns, however, as performing defensive assists with Seth means that you may also end up performing more assists to return back to Yanagi, and as we detailed in the previous sections, this may cause more headache than worth it since it actually alters which stance Yanagi is in. Overall, however, this is a decent option considering it has an A rank option instead of 3 S ranks, so I'm a fan. And now let's talk about the Bernice team. It's true, Bernice was made for Yanagi and they synergize extremely well with each other. Being off field while still being able to apply a burn is a major win for the Yanagi Bernice pairing, and the two deal amazing damage while they're at it. Caesar, or your choice of Lucy/Rina, can definitely make the team even crazier depending on what agents or fight you are encountering, but as always, I do favor Caesar the most as she provides an amazing 1000 attack increase while also preventing my main damage dealer from being interrupted. This isn't to say that Lucy or Rina aren't valuable either though, since both provide team-wide buffs that both anomaly agents in the team would appreciate. It just means that you gain damage while losing some safety. This might ultimately boil down to preference though. Now the final thing I want to readdress and remind you guys about is including Jane for your Yanagi team. After even more testing with Yanagi, it's official. There are plenty of other teams that work with Yanagi, but unfortunately Jane simply doesn't fit in them. Jane and Yanagi are both certified hypercarry greedy main DPS gods, and since they both share the same role, it felt wasteful and even awkward to play the two together. And as usual, you can still use characters like Piper or Grace if you want alternative anomaly agents on a non-Bernice disorder team, and seriously, I would recommend this over Jane since it did end up feeling way better since they just swap on field and leave soon after. Jane does do a bajillion damage though, so keep that in mind. But now let's talk about the final topic. Let's address pulling. I know Yanagi has been nerfed. ZenlessZoneZero is releasing anomaly after anomaly character, but as with all agents, there are some things to consider before you pull for a character. Yanagi's damage is extremely high and contends for the top DPS in the game, but she is an electric anomaly agent of which we already have Grace. However, this character is by no means the same sort of anomaly DPS since Grace is more focused on exhausting her energy, then leaving the field immediately after, and Yanagi buffs disorder, which no other character directly does. That being said, you could argue that other characters like Rina, Nicole, or Chingy affect overall DPS and can buff your damage of said disorders, which therefore you could then argue makes the disorder damage increase not that special. With this, I personally will be pulling for Yanagi since I like her design, and at this point, I really enjoy playing disorder. But with Miyabi being teased at every corner, I can totally understand why players would want want to hold off. As always, guys, spend responsibly. As always, guys, this is a guide and just my personal opinion when it comes to Yanagi and ZenlessZoneZero. I know a lot of you guys are on the Miyabi wear train, and I totally feel that. I get it. She looks cool. However, if you are interested in Yanagi, I hope this video gave you a bit more insight or helped you a little bit. Make sure, as always, to like, comment, turn on the notification bell, and subscribe, and I will see you guys on the next one. Stay safe, stay healthy, everyone. Good night.